Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Visualization and storytelling are very important in the work of tech teams. Our today's speaker, Stephen Sampson-Jones, Agile coach and visual facilitator at Universal Credit, makes use of both of these tools, and he creates amazing retrospective boards that every facilitator should use. Please welcome Stephen. The floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Alex. So yeah, it's a perfect introduction. So I've recently joined jobs. I've just joined MadeTech, which is a public sector consultancy. So if anyone's working in government or councils in the UK, feel free to reach out. And I've got a real passion for drawing. It's a very primitive form of storytelling, like you said, Alex. Like we all learned how to draw before we learned how to write, right? And since the pandemic, I've just been able to find that right balance of being able to bring those skills into my facilitation. You don't have to be a graphic designer or a doodler. You know, there's lots of different ways and techniques. But what I want to share with you today is what has retro got to doodle with it, and how can you introduce some of these visual skills, whether you draw or you're a keen photographer, or you want to make use of just basic stock images. I'm just going to show you some of the benefits and hopefully show you some of my favorite boards that I've shared with the Agile community today. And there's a little sneak peek of a Harry Potter one to come. So if you could just forward me to the next slide, Alex, that'd be much appreciated. So here's my CV in Lego format. So I'm from London, or Epping Forest within the United Kingdom. So I can see that I've got some colleagues with me today, which is absolutely brilliant. And my career to date has predominantly been in government. So I spent a bit of time acting Tom Cruise in Cocktail. Got a brilliant opportunity to work in UK Parliament. Done some work with the Ministry of Justice. Went on to work at Ofgem on the warm home discount and renewable energy, which is a big thing in the UK at present. And then most of you might be familiar with the Cabinet Office and GDS. I've also worked at the Department for Transport. I put the sort of DWP, which is Department for Work and Pensions, as the sort of stormtrooper. I've got a massive government critical service, about 6 million claimants that are potentially vulnerable people on benefits. And as of last week, I joined MadeTech. So that's just a short intro into my career, so in Lego format, just to help me remember. And if you could just ping me to the next slide, Alex, I just want to talk to you a little bit about why it's important to create engagement retrospectives and just some of the pros and cons. And then towards the end, I'll show you some of the boards and we can do a bit of a Q&A and you can pick my brains a little bit more. So why create engagement retrospectives? We've all been there, right? I'm assuming there's plenty of people on the call that work in agile product delivery teams, scrum teams potentially, and you do the tried and tested, same agile retrospective formats. It's the number one thing just to switch people off in these meetings. I've been there myself, where I've walked into sessions where someone's just drawn a smiley face, a sad face on the board, a zero setup, been there, done that, and we're just going through the motions. So I try to create bespoke retrospective formats, whether it's once a month, once a fortnight, whatever sort of iteration or time box cadences that you're working. I try to keep it fresh. So I think that's just a key thing, and just to highlight that we've probably been there and we just don't want people to switch off in these sessions, because it's a real opportunity to inspect and adapt how we're feeling, how we're working, and how we can make these incremental, small, marginal gain improvements within our work. So if you can move me to the next slide, Alex. And the pandemic that I kind of hinted at, you know, initially whilst I was trying to find my stride in these virtual whiteboarding tools, whether it's Miro, Mural, Jamboard, FigJam, all of these different boards that you can use, there's no preference out there. But I found that we've really lost that sort of like team social aspect, that camaraderie that you could build up in these kind of water cooler chats. And I'm sure we've all been there. I'm hoping I'm not on mute now and you can all hear me. But having really fun retrospectives that are tailored to your team's needs really helps build up these side of desk chats. And you know, it's just something to be aware of. Like, I never mandate that cameras are on, but again, it's physically taxing as a facilitator being able to read body language and read in the room. So I always strive to make it fun, bring people out their shells, and just make it as interactive as possible with a work focus still. But you know, it's a real opportunity to get to know your peers and your colleagues. And if you could just move me to the next slide, Alex, that'd be much appreciated. In my experience, feel free to put in the chat if it's otherwise. We all know the four key sort of Scrum events, 5 if you include the sprint itself, or even if you don't work in a Scrum team. In my experience, retrospectives are the first thing that normally go out the window. Like, people need the plan in. There's always typically a stand up. There's usually a playback or review at the end of that particular iteration. And the amount of times I've seen teams that just throw out the retrospective or just don't put the effort in, and they just go through the motions. So I think that's a real key thing to keep people switched on. Obviously, I use a lot of visuals. Every single visual that you see in this slide deck today is all hand drawn. I use Procreate on my iPad. You can use pen and paper, you can use flip chart, you can use a tool called Auto Draw, which is brilliant. It creates, you can just literally draw anything, and using machine learning, it knows what you're using. So that's a good way if you don't feel you've got great skills with pen and paper, or we've all got fantastic smartphones, so feel free to use that. But it's really key just to highlight that this is the first thing to go out the door. It's the first thing that happens when we veer off track, and it's really important to keep people switched on in these sessions. And if you just go to the next slide for me, and I kind of just alluded to that. So one of my key facilitation principles is turning that engagement switch on. Whether it's like my presentation style you're seeing today is a Pechakucha style, which is essentially Japanese word for chit chat, and it's just lots of images. I try not to use a lot of text, and I try to use the same approach in my retrospective formats. And even if you're not a delivery manager, agile coach, scrum master, there's more often than not you're going to use facilitation. You might be a teacher, you might work in banking, it doesn't matter. But I just try to inject a bit of fun and a bit of engagement. So like that's one of my first sort of key principles of the way that I kind of build my boards and my templates and my workshops, is that I try to hand draw stuff. I try to make it unique and interesting, and I try to keep people engaged through making my sessions as interactive as possible. And I'm going to show you how to do that at the end. Alex is going to share his screen, and we're going to show you some different ways in which you can do that. If you go to the next slide for me, please, Alex. Cool. So and a lot of people say to me, you've got to be creative and you've got to be great at drawing. I'm going to debunk that myth at the end. I've got a really good case study from someone that I mentor, and how he was able to take these lessons from pretty much this exact slide deck, and how he was able to influence his work. Just so you think that, oh, this might not relate to me. But another key bit in terms of ensuring people don't veer off the track, or it's not a case of, oh, we don't need to do a retro or retrospective this particular time box. I find in my experience asking a question in a different way is really crucial, right? And it's not a case, it works perfectly in terms of keeping things fresh. And you might be thinking, okay, well, how do I ask a question in a different way? Like, even if you just take your daily stand-up, right? What impediments do you have? What did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Making it more, okay, well, what unplanned work's coming in the last 24 hours? What does your schedule look like? Is there anything that I can support? And just asking different prompts, and it just keeps people, in particular participants, on their toes. And you'll notice from a lot of my boards, it normally covers 6 key themes across the prompts that I'm generating. And it's usually around kudos. There's a lot around mental health and empathy, especially working through a global pandemic for people, and being able to juggle childcare and high demands, placed on the way that they work and that change. I try to keep things along the sort of stop, start, continue route, and also that future perspective. And I'll show you that a little bit, but just be creative with your retrospective questions and prompts. They're always going to be roughly the same, but you can wrap those questions around a theme. And again, hold that thought. I'm going to show you some examples. So we're never doing anything too drastically. You're always going to cover the same topics, but how you ask that and how you gather those insights is really crucial. And it's really important to make it fun. So if you could go to the next slide for me, Alex. In my personal experience, and again, another one of my key philosophies is a fun retrospective is a good retrospective. It's a good way to inject a bit of my personality. You're probably seeing some of this come out through some of the references and images. I'm a big fan of cartoons and animation, and I spend a lot of time drawing and creating my retrospective templates, sat in front of the TV with the kids and getting them to support me and help me. So I find if I'm having fun and I'm putting effort into how I want my workshop to run, I normally try and storyboard it. So it's always going to have like a setting the scene, breaking the ice. I might use some data, which I probably wouldn't put in a template because it's specific to teams that you work with. And then you can get into the meat and bones of the sessions around some of those prompts. And it's really crucial to end on, or firstly, what you're going to do with those insights. So I use techniques like what, so what, now what. So we generate action owners, but also get that return of time invested from the team and identify who's doing what next. So there's a few different ways that you can make and tailor themed retrospectives. If you go to the next slide for me, Alex, the two recommendations from me personally is celebrating these microcultures, right? And what do I mean by that? Look, we've all got different preferences and needs, and there's a few techniques I'll share in a minute on how I kind of like tease these out of people that I work with. But even at the end, when I'm gathering feedback on my sessions, I'll start requesting people to generate ideas on the next theme. And it could be, well, what was the last TV show that you watched, or what people doing at the weekend, and just building those connections. It could be something quite specific, maybe to a holiday. So it could be like the Easter, it could be Christmas, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, all these holidays that you can create themes around. It could be the shared interest amongst books or music. So it's like the world's your oyster in terms of themes, but I try to make it specific to what people that I work with are interested in, and just celebrating those micro cultures through different holidays and periods in which lend themselves quite well to retrospectives, really. And Alex, if you go to the next slide for me. So something I culturally try to do is something called Frivolous Friday or Friday, or think of your own terminology that you could use. And it's just like a prompt I put in our Slack channel or our Mattermost or HipChat or Teams or whatever instant messaging you have, or whether you do it face to face. I just try to build empathy through these people connectors. So you can see there's little prompts here, all hand drawn, like, what's your favorite food? And that might come into our sprint naming conventions, or the next time I run an in-person retrospective, I'll bring that food in or generate a potluck. There might be things I hinted at a second ago, like what are you doing at the weekend, or what sports and hobbies do you have, and start building themes off the back of that, because I know I'm going to get buy-in. And luckily I work with people, like very cool people that suggest things like Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z, and Stranger Things is the big one at the minute. So just build that empathy through that and get people to suggest what the next theme should be. And that's normally how I get my ideas. But I'm also a big Disney and Pixar and animation nerd, as you can probably tell, and I've hinted at. So I get a lot of ideas from that. And if you go to the next slide for me, Alex, another really key bit is just to build psychological safety into your sessions. So like the easiest way of doing that, right, is the prime directive from Keith Norm. Like you've all probably seen it, we're all doing the best job in the circumstances we work at. A lot of us in the global pandemic with COVID, right? And I try to put my own twist on that as well. And I'll show you some examples very shortly on how you can use existing patterns and just elevate them and just make them more relevant around a theme potentially, right? And I try to move more to a gamified conversational type of dynamics, and that's just through effective facilitation. I don't know if people are familiar with liberating structures. That's my go-to really around using breakout rooms, getting people to pair up, setting ground rules around yes and rather than no but. So there's that ability to be able to build on ideas and not shut people up. Or to shut people out really, and having that highest voice is listened to. So just making sure that people feel safe to do so. And I think the easiest way to do that is just breaking the ice. And there's a lot of research that suggests as soon as you've found your voice in a group setting, it's then easier to contribute. So that's why I think there's a lot of talk in the agile community about icebreakers not being great. I always factor in, even if it's 5 minutes, just something for someone to find their voice at the outset, and they're much more likely to contribute in your session. So just if you don't take anything else away, that's a really, really useful thing. So if you go to the next slide for me a little bit, Alex, and I kind of already touched on this a little bit around building relationships and allowing them to grow organically. So like making use of things like 1, 2, 4 all, where I try to just like mix up the facilitation style, so if people aren't just dumping post-it notes on a wall or on a virtual whiteboard. So I might give people a minute or two of silent reflection, because then every single person gets to contribute. I then pair people up for a couple of minutes, build on ideas. I could even say, I want you to narrow it down to the top 5 post-its, ideas, topics, actions, experiments, however you want to phrase it, between that collective pair. So they're already doing some affinity sorting and prioritization. And then you could pair 2 pairs up and go, okay, you've got 10 post-its, 10 ideas. I want top 3. So it's just moving away from just traditional facilitation. Like I said, liberating structures is brilliant. It probably needs its own slot, but just make use of breakout rooms, make use of space, inject a bit of fun in there, and just change things up a little bit, keep people on their toes, right? If you go to the next slide for me, Alex, and one of the criticisms I get quite a lot in like the Agile community when I share boards and stuff is that they're normally pretty nerdy, and that's probably just because that's my personality. Like I said, it's contagious. It's going to come through because this is the stuff I like drawing, and and I like, but things don't have to be nerdy. They don't have to belong to a fandom like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. Like I said, like I make use of things like holidays and people's interests or shared interests where I can see there's a bit of conversation building momentum, and that's what I take away. But yeah, don't feel like you've got to be a massive sort of nerd or like be into certain things. Like you can pick any theme. Like I've got some good colleagues and friends within the community, like Dave Westcarth does a lot around sports, so like Ryder Cup. You got like the women's football Euros on at the minute, I believe. So he'll build themes based on sporting events that are relevant, like Wimbledon, for those that follow the tennis. So you don't have to follow in my footsteps. Find your own path and work out with your team what themes would be interesting to them. If you go to the next slide for me, Alex, you're going to take people on an unexpected journey together. And I hope you get the Bilbo Baggins reference there. And I've kind of given you a few cheats around that, around what the names of the teams you've worked with. So maybe there's something there you can get a theme out of, and ask at the end of your session, just repeat myself a little bit on what the next format could potentially be. And if you skip one more slide for me, Alex, probably the most sort of like the tip that I've held most closest to my chest, which I'm sharing with you all now, right, is take existing formats and elevate them. And I kind of alluded to this a little bit on that psychological safety and the prime directive, for those that are familiar. But this is a very conventional retrospective, right? It might not look like it, but this is the typical I like, I wish, I wonder, right? I'm sure there's countless people on the call that have seen this. Or even if you take mad, sad, glad, any of these things that can be quite boring, especially if you work on weekly sprints. Like how many times is that going to come up in most of our toolkits or facilitation arsenal? Probably quite a lot, right? So just take an existing format and elevate it. And there's a few tips that you can pick up here. So I try to make the time box available on the left-hand side. You can see on the top left, I've got a safety setter. So around the, getting everyone to speak and talk at the outset, even if it's just to come off mute and say hello. I've got an icebreaker in the bottom left-hand corner. So that's my sort of peddler's market, where I'm making use of mural in this instance, making use of mural icons that are built into the tool, and people can purchase an icon that resonates with them on how they're feeling. So it might be, I like the coffee, I'm in urgent need of caffeine, or it's the tiger, they're my favorite animal. It's just, it really doesn't matter what people pick. It's just getting them, just using the tool and immersing them into this Aladdin world, right? And just getting them just to break the ice and find their voice. So that's you can make things interactive like that, which works quite well. And like I wish, I wonder. For me, it just lended itself so well to Aladdin in this bit. Like I said, I'm a big Disney fan. So's my kids, and like the Cave of Wonders just lent itself perfectly. And I wish with the genie and his 3 wishes. So like sometimes it's not as easy, but that's just a little thought process into how my brain works and how I try to convert something quite conventional and quite boring. If I just took the tried and tested manner, and having like a friend like me. So sometimes they don't lend themselves quite well. So what I would do is look at things like songs, look at lyrics, look at quotes, look at episode titles, look at locations. There's loads of different ways that you can pull out those things. And like I said, they're always going to follow the same sort of pattern, right? You know, like things that you want, things that you need, things that you hate, you know, things to shout out about. So it's always going to follow that same sort of format. And like I said, alluded to at the outset, I always capture actions. What, so, what now works perfectly, because there's no point of having a retrospective if you're not committed and accountable to take these things forward. And then right at the bottom right, return for time invested. So I've actually moved away from having 3 and 5 as like a parameter. So I tend to stick with 4 because people can't just go slap bang in the middle, right? It kind of pushes them towards good or bad in terms of the session. And you can see there I've got some genie icons that I drew. And again, you can use Miro or Murals icons built in, or Google Images, and people can just drag and drop on that sort of that sliding scale, as you like, of the tiger. I can't remember what it's called now. Feel free to put it in the chat. Where, you know, green was this was really good fun. If I feel confident things are going to improve, you know, orange being a bit meh, and red being that was a complete waste of time. So that's just a little breakdown of one of my boards. If you go to the next slide for me, Alex, like I said, like, you don't have to be a visual facilitator. You don't have to be someone that's super confident on these tools. And this was a colleague of mine, Kish, that I worked with for about 3 weeks at the time. You know, he was asking me about some of these bits that I've put in a slide deck since. And he was working at a consultancy where every single Scrum Master within this consultancy had to provide a retrospective in that format. You know, what went well, what didn't go well, green and red, because their directors wanted to be able to see across every team what was happening, right? So he had no autonomy. The teams didn't feel safe. You know, there's low engagement. Like you can see on that board there, even though I've redacted a lot of the stuff, 7 insights. It's pretty poor. And, you know, I said to him, look, like, be bold, be brave, you know, try and inject a bit of fun, find out what the team like, make it interactive, right? So everything I've spoken about, and again, this isn't one of my examples. Alex, if you click next, this was the first retrospective that Kish introduced to his team within 2 weeks of working with me. He's taken all of these lessons. So I want to make it crystal clear, anyone can do this, right? He found out the team love retro arcade games and there was a chat, and he's picked Street Fighter as the theme from building those connections with people that he's just met. You know, there's an icebreaker there on, like, you know, what controller resonates with your childhood, and it just breaks the ice a bit. He's got a moving scale on how people feel, and he's using characters and their quotes to prompt people on, you know, what's good, what's bad, what's making you feel upset. So anyone can do it, right? And you don't have to be an expert illustrator to do that. You know, we've all got access to smartphones, we've all got access to Google, and yeah, it's just an example. I love that example because it just showcases everything I'm talking about is completely feasible for anyone else. And if you click next, Alex, what my message to you all is just go forth and experiment, right? Like this, like, you're setting the tone if you're facilitating for others to follow suit, right? So, you know, I just encourage you all to be brave, be bold, try something new. It might not be for you, right? But you're setting an example for others to follow suit. And I think I've only got one more slide left, Alex, which was around, you know, we'll do a bit of an Ask Me Anything at the end. But if you want to open up some of those, or just a couple of my greatest hits, as you were, and maybe we could just have a quick look at that and open the floor to any questions, I guess. Maybe the Harry Potter one to kick off proceedings. So this is actually the Mirrorverse. So I publish all of my Miro templates here. So like they're completely free. I don't make people subscribe, don't make people pay. It's completely open source. You can see there's already 500 people that have used this Harry Potter board, and you should be able to open it up, or even if you zoom in, if you don't want to create your own board, Alex, it's not a problem. But on the far left, if you zoom in for me, at the very least, I've got a Dumbledore's directive, right? So playing on that prime directive wording, and I've changed some of the words to include muggles and some of the sort of Harry Potter sort of fandom. You can see the second screen there. Oh, perfect. Yeah, Jan, it's always the same, right? It's that 5 key components of a retro. And apologies, Alex, your screen's lagging a bit, but I'm going to carry on talking, right? Oh, a little bit too far in. If you zoom in on where the cats and the frogs are, a little bit to the left. It's my icebreaker for this, just to ease people in. Like I said, it's got to be immersive. So picture this, folks. You're on the Hogwarts Express, or maybe you're in Diagon Alley, right? You're in Diagon Alley. You're with Hagrid, an 8-9 foot giant wizard, on your 11th birthday. What pet do you take to Hogwarts? Obviously, we've got a bit of a Scabbers rat there. We've got a little kitty cat. We've got a nibbler. Is it nibbler? I can't remember what they're called now. From Fantastic Beasts. That'd probably be my preference to get some gold. We've got one of the electric snails. We've got some frogs and an owl, and they can choose a butterbeer on their preference and why. You can see on the bottom right, right at the bottom, I've got little sorting hats. So that's my affinity sorting. So I always make bespoke dot voting counters. A bit better than just having a little red circle. Just mix it up, make it more immersive in your theme. And then if you just zoom in on the main image, Alex, you can see there's 6 prompts. And Jan's already kind of alluded to this. It's always going to cover the same stuff, right? So like, looking backwards, what would we do differently now that we didn't know at the start of our sprint or iteration? The time turner, right? Hermione turns back time and is able to replay actions in the past. Lends itself well. The future perspective, like what's the vision? Where do we want to work towards? Where do we want to work backwards from? And testamancy, so that's where reading the tea leaves for those that haven't read the books or watched the film, lent itself perfectly well. Like, what are the sort of lessons we want to learn and capture this sprint? We've got the remember rule. What's the stuff that's sucking the life and the energy out of us and is really impacting our mental health? Just on the left, Alex, we've got Dementor, right? Like Dementor's kiss that just literally just sucks the life out of us, which is essentially a metaphor for depression in the Harry Potter fandom. So I always capture how people are feeling to really keep part of us as facilitators to assess the team's health and be able to support. We've got stuff around sprint heroes from a quote, like I said, use quotes around Professor Snape's hero quote. And then we've got a Horcrux. And the team that I was working with that prompted this is that they were working on these massive features that were just taking ages to deliver value to end users. And I work in government, right? Like, it's a lot of life and death, with us delaying the release of critical work. So Horcrux is how can we split and slice our work better? So that lent itself quite well. So it's always going to follow 6 prompts. We'll look at another board in a minute. And then we've got mischief managed. So you waved your magic wand, do you choose the love potion? Do you choose the Barufio's brain elixir that you learn something new? Was it the sleeping potion I've set? Like maybe there's people asleep on this call after listening to me for half an hour. Who knows? Or worst case scenario, maybe Mrs. Weasley is going to send us a howler for me talking a load of nonsense, maybe. So that just gives you a theme. And maybe if we just look at the SpongeBob one quickly, Alex, just so people get a second flavour. I think it's on your second tab, or yeah, just right next to it. Yeah, we'll just give you a flavour of another one. And you'll see that I've got a tried and tested formula. If you're walking into my session, you're walking into that theme and that fandom. I tried to make it as immersive as humanly possible, and you'll see some similarities, right? But I've just remixed it and repurposed some of the bits. So I've got to try and remember myself what I've done with this one. Yeah, so I've got, choose the snout. So you can see I was going with this pet theme for a little while, and you can, using Miro's built-in icons, you can feed your snout some food and some drink, and say, well, what one prompted you? Is it the sort of derpy snout, like the gothic one? You can move it around. There's some kelp juice in the top left there. If you scroll onto the main board, like I said, I tend to go with 5 or 6 prompts. People don't have to use them all. They're just there to get you to think back and cast your mind. But if people can't think of something for a certain prompt or question, they can move on. So what have we got here? So we've got like secret ingredients from plankton. So what makes our team tick? What's our special sauce? I've reused my fun image. So I was probably couldn't be bothered to draw that one from scratch again. How's fun? How can we inject a bit more fun? What's evil? What are the things that we're doing that is detriment to our performance and our users? There's one here about the money's always right, but we always say in government, the user needs always right, and the user needs is always at the forefront of what we do. We've got some bits at the bottom around a bit of what's taken us by surprise. And again, I try to include like a futurespective type prompt, which is Squidward coiled up there using the quotes. You can see just how I've remodeled the same sort of formula, how I've taken quotes, how I've taken different components of that theme. And then just to finish it off, again, a return of time invested, you know, from good to crap essentially. And they can use a crusty burger to sort of lock in that choice. So I think I've probably done enough talking. I'm going to give people 20 minutes or so for a Q&A, and that's me. Like I said, it's all hand drawn. You don't have to draw. You could take images. There's lots of brilliant resources out there. You've got the Miroverse, which Alex kind of hovered over. I'm also on Doodle, so I post a load of good stuff. And then two brilliant friends of mine that if you don't follow, it's well worth doing that. Dave Westgarth produces some amazing sporting and film retrospective formats, and the virtual agile coach Chris Stone, another good friend of mine. He's got a website that's got something like 130 retrospective formats on there, and including a number of my own ones as well. So yeah, if this has piqued your interest, there's a whole community out there to get stuck into. And yeah, if you use any of my boards, let me know what you think, and some of the stuff I've been preaching today. So yeah, open the floor, I guess, Alex, and thank you for screen sharing for me. It's a bit of teamwork there, despite the tech issues.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So let me switch off the recording and let's move on to the discussion.